Hello and welcome to the webinar, Ask Me Anything with Jeff Gothelf. My name is Jim Callback. I'm the head of customer success at Mural, and I'll be your host for today. And we're thrilled that Jeff is joining us today to answer some of your questions about Lean UX and related topics. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jim. Always good to hang out with you, whether it's in cyberspace or in meat space.
In meat space.
I like our conversations a lot.
Nice. Yeah, looking forward to tomorrow night, too.
Yep.
So for those of you who don't know Jeff, which I can't imagine, but Jeff is the author of two books, Lean UX, which came out in 2013, the first edition, and the second edition recently appeared. I think that was in 2016, right? The second edition, Jeff?
Yeah, it just came out in October, just a couple months ago.
A couple months ago. Second edition, Lean UX, together with Josh Seid, and that really defined the field of Lean UX. It's the seminal work around Lean UX. And recently, based on that, Jeff developed a Lean UX canvas that you can go out and grab. We're going to be sending you all these links as well, too, so don't worry about that. You can get to the canvas. We'll make sure you have a link to that. And more recently, or forthcoming, I should say, is Jeff's second book called Sense and Respond. And I know we're all eagerly awaiting that one. I have my pre-order in on Amazon as well, too. We'll be talking a little bit about that. I just wanted to also highlight our partnership. Jeff graciously agreed to partner with Mural about a year and a half ago now, and we did some remote Lean UX sessions, and you can read about those on our blogs. On our blog, again, we'll send around these links to this, but we did 3 pilot sessions where we did Jeff's Lean UX technique with a remote team, and then he also did a session with FanDuel. And we have a blog post about that as well, too. And based on that work, we've published a Mural template. So if you can go out and grab that Mural template if you want to get some Lean UX going with your remote team. We have a template so you can get started right away. I want to get into the questions, but one last thing before I do, just a little bit of housekeeping here. You can follow us on Twitter. That's @Mural. If you want to follow Jeff, it's @JBoogie. And use the hashtag LeanUX for this session. We got a lot of questions in already, so we're got a nice start of questions that we're going to get going with. But if you do have a question for Jeff, please type it into the Q&A pane. You have a chat pane and a Q&A option in the Zoom software here. Use the Q&A one for your questions. You have a better chance that we'll see them there. And then we'll be taking some questions as we go on in the webinar. You can also follow along. And by that, I mean this Mural that I'm presenting from right now. If you're not familiar with Mural, it's a browser-based online whiteboard. You can follow along this Mural in the view-only mode. If you use this link right here, and my colleague Amelia, who's helping out today, she's going to send this link around right now, too. So you can click on that and get the view-only link of this Mural. The advantage there is that you'll have access to all the links of the things that I just showed, and any link that we add to it as well, too. You'll have that access as well. Otherwise, you can stick with the Zoom software, follow me there, and I'll be presenting. What we're going to do is kind of a sketchnoting type of situation, and my colleague Mark Tippin is going to be putting up some concepts and images that reflect Jeff's answers down here. So I'm just going to zoom on down here a little bit. I see a lot of people there. You know what? I'm actually going to go in and hide the cursors. There you go. You can hide cursors in Mural too. So there you go. You ready to go, Jeff?
Yeah,
all right, let's do this. So I actually wanted to start with the second book and ask you, but what was the impetus for Sense and Respond?
Yeah, thanks. Sense and Respond, and by the way, speaking of, the book's out Feb 7, and the publisher, Harvard Business Press, emailed us and said they actually got physical copies, and they sent us a copy that was is due to be delivered. I keep looking at my window because of the UPS truck, because I'm going to get my first physical copy today, which I'm really excited about. But really, so, you know, Sense and Respond was a reaction. It was a response, if you will, forgive the pun, to the feedback that we sensed from Lean UX. So there's a bit of a dog fooding there as well. Lean UX has now been out as a book for 4 years. It was published in March of 13. Second edition came out last year. There has been a tremendous conversation globally about this way of working. And we've been lucky enough, Josh Seid and I, to be at the center of that conversation in many ways. And we've gotten lots of feedback. And one of the biggest themes of feedback, and perhaps the most often heard bit of feedback, was this: we love Lean UX. We want to work this way. My boss won't let me work this way. Mm-hmm. My company doesn't work this way. I'll leave a workshop or a training or a keynote, and I always hear this, almost without fail. I wish my VP was here. I wish the guys from the business owners were here to hear this. Mm-hmm. And so this was, to us, was a clear signal that there was a missing piece of this conversation that we could potentially offer. And so Sense and Respond is a book for managers. It's a book for leaders, and it is designed to make the case for creating a culture of continuous learning and a culture that leverages technology to build a customer-centric and employee-centric approach to management and ultimately product development. And so really the book makes two cases. There's two theses in the book. The first half of the book makes the case that you're in the software business. And so if you're a business of scale, if you're a business that seeks to scale in the 21st century, you are first and foremost in the software business. And it doesn't matter what you make, whether, obviously Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, they're obviously in the software business, but even companies that make, Sharpies, and they make cars, and they make furniture, if you seek to scale that organization, you have to see yourself first as a software company, because that's how you scale in the 21st century. And we have examples from every industry in there, from agriculture to fashion to retail to financial services. And the second half of the book says, okay, if you buy the first half, that you're in the software business, then guess what? Managing a software-based business is different. You can't manage it like a factory. It's not a production line of software widgets where we're just sort of cranking out bits of code and hoping that that will work. And here's how it's different. Here's why you should change. And not just, it's not just management or leadership, but it's how does finance change? How does HR change? Marketing, legal, right? All of these other disciplines that a company can't go to business without. And that's what the book is about. It's a synthesis of a lot of ideas like lean and lean startup and lean UX and agile and management theories into a relatively concise case for building the kinds of cultures that support a lean UX way of working.
So the two books then go together. Would you see as one as the kind of the follow-on? What exactly is the relationship then between Lean UX and Sense and Respond?
Yeah. So my and again, this is my perception. There's a little bit of assumptions here because I don't have the best data in the world on this kind of stuff. But my assumption is that Lean UX is the book for practitioners, and then Sense and Respond is the book that those practitioners buy for their boss.
I see.
That's my assumption, roughly. And obviously, if you're moving into leadership, it's a really good read and a good conversation to have with your colleagues in management and in leadership.
Gotcha. Great. So yeah, we had a lot of questions around some of the topics that you just touched on. So hopefully we can take a deep dive on some of those and get into some detail. We got some questions in before the webinar started here. And I just wanted to go to one of them that sounds related. And this one comes from Eric. And he's talking about, the overall process in his organization. And he asks, what advice do you have when it comes to essentially having one shot at design with no ability to iterate after implementation? He talks about the ability to rapid prototype and test and that kind of thing. But the process of the company doesn't allow or doesn't favor or motivate iteration after implementation. I think there's that question, but a general process question too it's wrapped around that question.
That's really interesting, right? So rapid prototyping and testing is not one shot at design, right? If you're rapid prototyping and you're testing, then you're getting multiple shots at that design, at least in advance of shipping it.
Yeah.
Right? Once you've shipped it, I've heard this before. It's been a while since I've heard this particular this question. There was certainly a time about 4, 5, 6 years ago where it felt like designers were held to a different standard, where it was this standard of get it right the first time, because I'm not going back and fixing anything. Like, we're not going back. But for some reason, that was the only discipline that had to get that right the first time. Right? We're always going to refactor the code. We're always going to fix bugs. We're always going to tweak copy and marketing and so forth. So I never understood why designers had to get it right the first time. Now, the best thing that you can do, so if you're doing rapid prototyping and testing in advance of shipping, you're collecting evidence and data for the solution that's ultimately being implemented. Now, the thing that I would do is that once that solution is implemented, I would continue collecting that data, that quantitative and qualitative data that says, look, we based on what we learned leading up to launch, this was our best guess as to what the right design was. Now, after launch, we're seeing that some of those things were right, and maybe some of those things were not right. And so here is an evidence-based case for adjusting the design after shipping. And if we adjust it, here is the impact to the business. And so I think that in any situation like that, where iteration is dissuaded or seen as extra work, or, oh, you screwed up, right? You didn't get it right the first time. Then making the case for an iteration or a fix always, in my experience, has always been more successful when you use evidence, data. It can be qualitative data, but quantitative and qualitative data that says, here's the performance gap that we're seeing. Here's what's driving that performance gap. Here's roughly what the fix should be and what it would cost to fix it. And if we fix it, here's what the perceived ROI is on that effort, right? And at least you're making a business case for the work in that situation. And I think that that's your best bet to try to drive that culture of iteration and learning.
Right.
Beyond that, I mean, that's kind of a tough situation to be in, but that's where I would start with that.
Okay. No, that's great. And just to clarify, he does say after implementation. So before implementation, he can iterate, but it's then, once you do ship it, then it is the attitude, as you just said, is, we're not going back on the design. What do you mean you got it wrong? And, but I think your answer is absolutely right. So thanks for that. I had a related question about, but this is, I think, more related to working with clients. So if you're working internally, I think your relationship's different than when you're working with a client, and you may get a brief and scope out, a recommendation for what they need, and then they start slashing things, right? So how do you, there's a question about how do you deal with that, but how can you then work quicker or still go through the steps, but quicker?
With as a service provider,
right? When they're slashing your budget and your time as a service provider.
Yeah, this was a really difficult, a series of difficult lessons that we learned at Neo. We spent 4 years building an agency that tried to work this way, and perhaps the most difficult thing for us to figure out was how to pitch, sell, and then deliver the relationship with clients, because even if we convinced them that this was a better way to work, in most cases, our clients didn't work this way, right? They hired us to kind of get a taste of it and to get a sense of what that was like. And so I think that the goal is to frame your client relationships away from feature sets as much as you can, or at least away from a defined, written in stone feature set. Mm-hmm. And to structure those conversations more so around the net outcome that you'd like to see as a business or for your customers. Now, look, it's going to be impossible, just based on my experience at least, to have that conversation and not talk about features. Internally, you could try to have that conversation, but with a client, they're going to want to know, if we're giving you $1 million, what's it going to do at the end of it, right? And so I think you can have that conversation around features, but it's a secondary conversation. Mm-hmm. Right? The first conversation is about outcomes. Really, what does success really look like? If we actually choose the right features, design them well, implement them well, and they work, right? They solve a real customer need in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. How will we know? And we'll know because customers buy more stuff from us, or spend less time doing one thing and more time doing something else, right? So we've got those kinds of customer-centric behaviors that we can measure. And then we can say, we think that these 10 features will actually help us achieve that. And let's start working towards that. and measure our progress based on the outcomes that we agreed to at the beginning of the engagement. And so this way you can adjust your scope moving forward. Now, if you can build that relationship, so it's not an easy sell, but if you can frame the relationship that way, then if there's a budgeting conversation or a scope cutting conversation, then the choices become a bit more, the impact of the choices that you're making become a bit more concrete, because it's less about you will get this feature or you will not get that feature, and more about, well, you asked us to drive retention by 50%. And currently we're at 18%. We're projecting that this next feature may get it up to 25 or 30, and then we're out of budget, right? So we can get you to hopefully about 25 or 30% retention, but that still falls short of your goal. So all of a sudden, again, the conversation that you're having is a business conversation. It's an ROI risk and trade-off conversation that says, okay, you're slashing my budget here. Right. The risk of that is that we're not going to hit our retention targets, and the financial impact of that 20% gap in retention is X dollars. Right. And then all of a sudden you're saying you're cutting $50K out of my budget and you're going to take a $500K hit on retention. Right? That conversation all of a sudden becomes a much more meaningful conversation to a sponsor, to a project sponsor, than you will get Facebook authentication versus you will not get Facebook authentication. So that's the culture, or the relationship you want to foster with your clients, so that when those trade-offs happen, you're having a business discussion about what the budget cuts mean to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve as a company.
Yeah, great. And a lot of those topics, I presume, are in Sense and Respond. So you might recommend buying not only your boss, but your client a copy of Sense and Respond. Is that right?
I recommend you buy it for everybody.
There you go. There, setting you up, Jeff, for that one. No, but seriously, because very often you're not necessarily in that position to have those conversations as a UX designer, let's say. So Sense and Respond, correct me if I'm wrong, it helps you make those arguments for getting that higher level change, whether it's inside of an organization or setting up a new relationship, because that relationship that you just described might be different than what a client is used to or that your company is used to. Is that right? Yes.
And again, I think, this is the thing too, I think that's interesting, right? And so, and again, your company, your politics, the corporate politics, your seniority, your tenure at the company will affect all of this. But I think ultimately to be, I think as UX designers grow in their career, I think it is their responsibility to start to look at the bigger picture, right? So I get it. You're starting off with your career. You're learning how to do interaction design. You're focused on building good workflows and great product experiences. That's great. At some point, though, right, the conversation broadens, and so the more that you can speak to the business impact of what you're doing and why the business decisions behind your design choices, the more impactful you can be. And so to some extent, I agree with you that yes, most UX designers are not in a position to have these kinds of conversations. But I would push back and say that I think more UX designers need to insert themselves into those conversations with fact, right? With evidence, not just this is a better way to do this.
Right, and I just want to highlight that with a quote that I remember reading from you. It was a while ago now, maybe even pre-Lean UX, where you talked about being grassroots strategic leaders as well too. So you don't have to have that title. You can still try to make things happen. And Lean UX is a tool to help you do that, because it starts with the outcomes, right? That's your first question, is what do you want to accomplish? So you necessarily have to have that conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, and you need to be involved in it, right? I mean, it's all too many teams get the work handed to them as a list of, as a checklist of things they have to build and design, as opposed to those outcomes. And I think that it's fair as a designer, as a product manager, as an engineer, to raise your hand and ask why. Why is this the number one thing that we're working on? And then let's make sure that this actually should be the number one thing.
Yeah. Oh, I want to stay practical a little bit right now, and we have some questions, particularly around these topics of resourcing and constraints and things like that. Lots of times UX designers are working on multiple projects at a time. Should someone focus on one project when they're thinking lean, or is it okay to have multiple projects going at the same time in your experience?
I think this is an easy one and has nothing to do with lean. You should be working on one project at a time.
Why is that?
Because, and I'm speaking again, this is speaking for people who are in-house at a company or an agency. Obviously, if you're a freelancer, you need to budget your time accordingly. But if you're working in-house or an agency, focusing on an initiative is the key. Why? Because there is always learning that can be done. There's always design that can be done. There is a cost to context switching that never gets accounted for when people get distributed between 3 or 4 or 5 projects. It's not that easy to switch from a project in retail to a project in fashion to a project in healthcare over the course of a day, right? And there are different efforts and there are different customers and different goals. So there's a cost there. If you're working on teams, the teams are relying on you. And if you are not focused on Team A's project today, you're working on Team B, then Team A is hanging out. Or they're going to move forward without you, or they're just going to sit around and wait for you to get work done. So the productivity gets lost. And I think lastly, it really puts, when you staff anyone, whether it's a designer or anybody else, across multiple projects, you're putting them in a really crappy position, right? Because each one of those projects has a number one priority that day, that week, that month. And every day that I come into work as a designer with 3 number one priorities, I'm pissing off at least 2 people, right? Because I'm not working on 2 people's number one priority because I can only do one thing at a time. And so the most productive teams, the most successful teams, and certainly the most mature, lean, and agile teams that I've seen are dedicated to an initiative until they hit their goal, and then they move on to the next one. I realize that's not the reality in most situations, but that's the ideal.
And that's what you should strive for then, not volunteering for 5 different projects, but saying, hey, it's better for us if I'm on one project, because you might have that perfect storm, right, where there are 3 deadlines. And I think on the other side, you might have the perfect lull, if that's a word. I think I might just coined a term, the perfect lull, where you're in 3 project lulls, and you're actually not as efficient, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, you can't schedule somebody 100% of the time. They need that flexibility. They need that thinking time, that ideation time, that time for ideas to breathe a little bit. And I just feel like that's lost again, particularly on designers. I feel like engineers get a pass on this a little bit more than designers again.
Yeah, let's talk about designers. That's another topic. We got a question from Rochelle about the relationship of lean UX to existing UX design processes or design thinking, where there might be divergent thinking, going broad, exploring lots of concepts, let's say in a design thinking kind of situation, versus only focusing on one. So, just within the practice of design, do you think there's a potential conflict there between lean UX and intense focus versus, hey, let's diverge and be exploratory?
No, not at all. I think that there's perhaps a misunderstanding of what a lean UX practice might be. It's not a practice that says do less work necessarily, or pick an idea and just go with it. It's really just the methodology came out of intense efforts that ended up being highly wasteful. Mm-hmm. So working heads down for 3 months on a design that ultimately, 30% of it actually got implemented and shipped, and it sucked, right? Or it didn't actually work in the end. And so I think that lean UX, I think, is a terrific conduit or a methodology for design exploration. It just needs to be design exploration in the service of an explicit customer need. Mm-hmm. And that customer need needs to drive the decision-making about which directions get explored further and which don't.
Right.
To me, that's where those things play nicely together. Now, if you're in a situation where you can spin up several experiments at the same time,
mm-hmm.
you can get some pretty decent and quick quantitative and qualitative feedback. There's no reason why you couldn't explore 3, 4, 5 different directions. But ultimately, I think that designers probably have an opinion about what the most likely exploration or two explorations are to succeed. And so there's probably more rare situations where it's 6, 8, 10 different directions someone has to explore. Typically it's 1 or 2, and I think that Lean UX absolutely supports that kind of exploration.
Gotcha. And the second part of her question, which also Jamie's asking about too, is kind of balancing short-term designs that are in a delivery mode versus long-term or holistic thinking. When you have I'm just going to throw this out there and add it to their questions, but let's say you have a product suite and their interaction between components and maybe even across different development teams as well too. And there's, a portal or some kind of navigation scheme or some kind of, overarching experience that often gets overlooked when you're in a siloed project team. Where is the time to do that kind of more holistic thinking in Lean UX?
Yeah, great question. So a couple thoughts. First of all, yes, scale is a challenge. Absolutely. One of my biggest critiques of Agile is that there's no real material. I mean, you could talk about SAFe, perhaps, the Scaled Agile framework, but there's no real material about how to do Agile at scale with multiple teams. And I think that Lean UX, the book, the material certainly that we've written, suffers from the same sort of challenge there. So we focus on a team level, project level methodology. And I agree that one of the biggest mistakes or the biggest challenges that I've seen teams struggle with as they try to practice Lean UX is really they get focused in on you talk about seeing the forest for the trees. We're talking about they're at the leaf level, a branch, right? And then really losing the entire context. So yeah, when does that strategy conversation come in? Look, I think that it comes in at the beginning of an initiative, right? I think it's an ongoing conversation that needs to be owned by senior members of the product organization or the business or whoever it is, right? There needs to be a clear articulation of the corporate strategy, for example, for the year, right? Our goal for this year is to become the leader in online automotive sales, and we will know that this is, kind of our OKRs, our success criteria reflect these kind of customer behaviors. That gives us a strategy, right? And then there are leaders within the various components of our product suite that I think are responsible, that should be responsible for the success of their particular vertical or whatever it is, right? But also for that horizontal conversation that says, hey, we're optimizing for this thing over here, and that it affects how your line of business works over here. So we should actually coordinate those efforts. Now, the only way that I've seen that done successfully is to have those conversations up front at the beginning of initiatives and discuss dependencies and the potential impacts of moving those things around, to maintain those kinds of conversations on a regular cadence. So whether it's a weekly scrum of scrums or a monthly leads meeting or whatever it is. And then I think most importantly is to make sure that we are managing these dependent initiatives with similar or the same success criteria. Mm-hmm. And that success criteria being some kind of a customer-centric metric or a behavior, a behavioral change in customers that we'd like to see. And the reason for that is because if you have 5 different business lines, or 5 different business units, even if they share a common strategy, if they're optimizing locally for their particular success criteria, and that's how they get incentivized or bonused or rewarded or promoted or whatever, they don't care about the other 4. Mm-hmm. Right? If my bonus comes from hitting my number, I'm going to hit my number, and I don't care about your number.
Right.
right? Because I want my bonus or my promotion or whatever it is. And so if we can find success criteria that span across these verticals,
right,
then all of a sudden, if I'm optimizing locally and it's screwing over these other three people, that's going to matter to me.
right.
So it forces, even if you don't have a formal coordinated effort conversation across those verticals, people will self-organize because they have to. That's how they get paid.
Right. Yeah. That's great that the incentive needs to be shared as well too. You know who's got some great thinking on this, Jeff? A mutual acquaintance of ours, Arne Kittler from Zing in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And he has a little process out there in German. It's called Auftragsklärung, which is essentially mission clarification. And I use the German word because that's the URL that they use. They actually kept the German word up there because there was not a good translation for it. But I think it's Auftragsklärung.de is the website. But he's got a nice little framework to help teams figure out how they fit into the bigger picture. And one of the points that he makes is, you want a team to be independent, but you have to earn your independence. You don't just get independent from the bigger picture. Like you gotta tell everybody else why they should let you go, and that you've thought about the bigger picture, and then you get the independence. So I'll share that with you, some of the thoughts that he's had there too, and we'll get the link out to folks too there. But there you go, Auftragsklärung. You got a little German there. But let's go actually in the other direction, because you recently tweeted about Jira being a place to lose sight of work.
I believe I said that if you put it in Jira, it's like see.
Well, so tell us a little more about it. What is Jira, and why is that like throwing something into the sea?
Look, Jira's a project management tool, and tools aren't inherently bad, right? I mean, it's how they're used. Jira seems to be one of the more popular project or initiative management tools, very agile friendly, very Scrum and Sprint friendly. They just bought Trello this week, which was a competitor of theirs, which made me a little sad because I fear for the future of Trello. I love Trello. I use it for everything. But look, the concern is that, people complain about Jira and they think, it's just, the risk with any kind of project management tool, and it doesn't matter which one it is that ideas get lost in there, or we just kind of drop stuff in there and we'll get to it later. And they start to function as substitutes for interaction with your colleagues. And I think that's the biggest risk, is that Jira, in many of the organizations that I work with, and I tend to work with larger organizations, Jira tends to function as the communication tool between product design and engineering, particularly between product and design and engineering.
Right.
And what that does is it breaks that shared understanding that we promote in a Lean UX way of working. It breaks the conversation that agile teams, strive for, and it just sort of says, here I've put, it's just like, it's like you're typing some stuff into the ordering system at McDonald's. I ordered a burger and fries, and then someone's got to make the burger and fries, right? They don't ask why.
Right.
And so that's the risk of these tools. And so if you're kind of just throwing stuff in there and it's getting lost in there, or it's getting lost in the complication of the tool, then the risk is that we simply start to kind of break that back down into this software factory model, which I simply think is just less successful and less effective than a more collaborative one.
Yeah. So along those lines, and I know you've worked a lot with Jeff Patton, and if you read his book, User Story Mapping, he complains about that too, the Frankensteining of products, and is working on Mr. Potato Head. Everybody, you end up with the big red lips and the Groucho Marx glasses because nobody's looking at the big picture, right? So user story mapping, I think, is one way, and I know you've worked with him. That's why I'm going to ask you about user story mapping and any experience you have with that particular technique and how it fits in.
Yeah, I really like user story mapping in that it forces that collaborative conversation. It forces you to get out of a tool and into a physical space, standing next to your colleagues and physically moving bits around and talking through the customer experience, right? What are the workflows? What are the steps that someone goes through? I think that, Jeff and I have worked user story mapping into sort of the process in a variety of different ways. I think one of the more effective ways that it fits into the process is as a way to think through, once you have hypotheses written,
Mm-hmm.
Especially higher level hypotheses, sort of at the beginning of initiatives that are not very tactical, is to start to think through what an initial pass and an experience could look like for a hypothesis, right? And so once you've got a series of assumptions that you've declared about the customer and what they're trying to achieve, what you care about as a business, and what feature or features or products you might build to solve that, and then thinking through what that experience might look like can help you carve out or slice out, as Jeff calls it, that MVP experience.
Right.
Now, I think and story mapping is powerful, and you can use it for release planning. You can use it for MVPs. That's the thing I want to make sure that is taken away from this particular discussion, is that if, let's say, you declare a bunch of assumptions, you write a hypothesis about how you think you can solve it, and then you do a story map about that hypothesis. When you carve out that initial slice, that MVP slice, that's not necessarily, and again, I'm speaking in generalities because context will determine what you actually do, but that's not necessarily saying, okay, go build this slice. It just says that, look, this is roughly the bare minimum experience that we need to create to determine if this hypothesis is valid. And so then, are there lighter weight ways for us to create this experience before just greenlighting a 3 to 6 or 9 month build to make it so?
Right, exactly. Got a couple questions about specifically around user testing, since we're talking about hypotheses there, and the number of people, or how do you know when your idea is validated? And very often, if you have a small sample size, I mean, we've been seeing this in usability for decades now, that stakeholders bucking the fact that you only talk to 5 users, right? You don't know that then. What's your thought on that? Is when is an idea validated or not?
Is an idea ever validated?
Validated enough, I guess. Then.
Yeah. Well, that's just it, right? I mean, but that's actually a really good point, right? It's valid enough, right? But here's the thing. This is another one of those sort of big obstacles, I think, to good kind of lean UX hygiene. And what is teams will do they'll run an experiment. Right, whatever that experiment is. They'll build a prototype, they'll do an A/B test, they'll talk to customers, they'll do some research, whatever it is, and they'll get positive feedback, whether it's from 5 users or 15. And then they'll say, okay, it's valid, terrific, let's go work for 9 months.
Right.
And figure it out. And to me, that is one of the biggest pitfalls of teams that are trying lean UX. Essentially, what you want to do, and this is the way that I teach it in my workshops and when I train teams, is this. When we look at a hypothesis and we say, okay, what's the riskiest thing about this hypothesis? In other words, what's the most important thing that we need to learn first? The thing that if it's wrong, the hypothesis is wrong, and we just got to go work on something else. That's the first question in the first conversation. The second conversation, once you've identified that riskiest thing, is what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn that? And that's your MVP, that's your experiment, that's your next thing. Now you go and run that experiment once you've decided what that is. You come back, you get some kind of feedback. Let's say the feedback is good, right? Yeah, that thing's valid, terrific. All you've done at that point is you have given yourself the okay to take the next small step forward. And the next small step is the same one you just took. Okay, now that we know that this thing is true, what's the next riskiest thing about this hypothesis?
Right.
And then what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn that? Eventually, each one of those subsequent investments increases in scope, because the thing that you have to do to learn the next most important thing will inevitably end up being write some code, design some features, launch a product, right? That type of thing. And so we are iterating our way towards a more robust, a better designed, a more targeted approach to solving this business problem. And so that's one issue. Now to get back to kind of where this conversation, this particular question started, is in these early experiments, again, you're not looking for, that stamp that says done, valid, build it, see you in 9 months.
Right.
You're looking for the green light that says you can go 2 more weeks on this project, right?
Gotcha.
Right. And so to get that, what do you need for that? You need to talk to 5 customers, and if you get 5 good customers and you ask them the same kind of questions, and 4 out of 5 tell you that this thing is broken and it's a real issue for them, that's a good enough signal that says, great, we're going to work on this for 2 more weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 more weeks after that, and 2 more weeks after that. The point here is that the research ultimately becomes statistically significant. But what we want to do is we simply want to do smaller research efforts more often. Right? Do less of that kind of huge research, but we want to do it more often so that we're always continuously learning through each cycle. Right. And so if someone says, well, how do you know you only talked to 5 customers and three of them said that this was a good idea, how do you know we should work on it? Well, you're saying, look, all I'm saying is I'm going to work on this for 2 more weeks,
right,
or another month. And in that month, we're going to talk to 20 more people.
Right.
And so that's how I think about it. I think that's the key to having these conversations. And frankly, one of the most successful formats, and we've detailed it in the Lean UX book in the first edition, the second edition as well, was simply building this regular cadence of customer conversations. So
right.
Every week you're talking to 3 to 5 people. And so you're getting that micro level of feedback on the thing that you're working on this week, but inevitably there is this macro trend or set of trends that you're monitoring on a week-to-week basis, because there's always context setting and early conversations at the beginning of every customer interview. And it really helps you kind of see the shifts in your personas, in what they're trying to achieve, and in significant, behavioral shifts in how they're thinking about things.
Yeah, and you know what else I've found? I have a question that's not from the crowd here, but from my own experience to follow up on what you just said there as well too, is that the data doesn't make a decision. It's still a team has to make a decision to move forward or not. And what I have found is that if you reduce it to just data points, you're not going to get the same decision than you would if the team were there. So the tactic that I've always, you're only talking to 2 or 3 people, but everybody on the team saw those 2 or 3 people's vomit on your design, or praise it or whatever it is. Yeah. Then you don't have that blowback to a low sample. Have you had that experience too?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the most powerful thing you can do, and it's the most difficult thing to make happen. But if you can get your team to see those conversations firsthand or live, to drive those conversations, then a lot of this resistance falls away, right? Of course, then the other risk is that, hey, that one guy hated it, we should change it, right? And it's like, there's that fine balance, right? But yes, getting your team, your executives, your engineers in front of customers is so powerful.
Right, exactly. I want to shift just a little bit, kind of keeping the designer frame of mind. I got actually a couple questions on the same topic, and I'm not sure why these fit in, but I'm sure you've gotten the question before. So Jonathan asks simply, do all UX designers need to learn to code?
I didn't know we were going to talk about religion. I have religious arguments.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, look, I mean, it's ask me anything, so I'm going to give you my answer on this particular topic. I believe that designers need to understand the materials in which they work, right? So if I'm a carpenter, if I'm a furniture designer, right, I need to understand the different kinds of wood, the different kinds of nails, the different kinds of whatever. I don't know anything about furniture design, so, but that's right. But I think so if you design technology, you need to understand technology. Now, to what level? I think you need to know how it works. I think you need to know how what it looks like. Yeah. You need to be able to understand it at a high level by looking at it. Do you need to be able to write production level code? Probably not, since we've got people who specialize in that. But you need to have some kind of a surface level understanding of the materials that you're working in. Is that learning how to code? Yes. Is it learning to become a software engineer? Not necessarily.
Great. Okay. Got a couple other questions too. Maybe going back more towards the organization and the organizational challenges too.
Sure.
And this I got a couple of different questions here that are related. One is around being kind of a one person team, and how do you approach doing all the things that you just touched on? How do you do that when it's just you?
It's just you as the only UX designer?
The only UX designer, yeah.
Yeah. That's really tough. I mean, it really depends on how badly you're outnumbered when you're a team of one. I think the best thing you can do in that situation is evangelize. So you do your work, you support, one primary team, maybe you support a secondary team because there's only one of you, and then you evangelize as much as you can so that hopefully you can drive some headcount, some UX-related headcount. And what I mean by evangelize is, and I've done these things when I've worked in organizations where we've been heavily outnumbered. You write a weekly newsletter to the entire company, or a blog post, the whole company, that talks about, this week in UX.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we did, right? You get a spot at the monthly all hands every now and again to talk about a project. You hold brown bags about, hey, this is what UX design is all about, or hey, this is what research looks like, or this is what prototyping looks like, or whatever it is. Anything you can do to elevate the profile internally of the work that you're doing, and then to point to specific work that you've done that has led to success, customer success, business success. That's what I would do. The other things that you can do if you're a team of one or less, and if you've got the ability to do this, or if you can find a partner in development to help you with this, is to put together pattern libraries or style guides or along those lines that codify the basic interaction components of your product or your product suite or your app or whatever it is. What this does is it gets you out of the daily discussions about forms and button logics and headers and carousels and all those types of things, right? Hamburger menus and things like that. We just say, look, we use this for navigation, we use this for forms, and then at the very least, if you've got that asset library, that design pattern library, people can build other elements of the experience without having to work with you and still do a decent job with it, because you've identified to them exactly how to do this. And that at least lets you, as a team of one or a team of two, focus on the more difficult design challenges. And so at least lets you focus a bit more strategically at that point as well.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions in the kind of the area of pattern library. You have UI elements that you've already validated, or that are validated, so you can reuse those. That's the answer that I heard right now, to help you scale, particularly if you're outnumbered. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there might also be a touch point to technology there as well too. I know there's a movement towards live pattern libraries and online pattern libraries. So it's not a pattern library that's an abstraction. It's a pattern library that's actually code snippets and things like that. Do you have any experience with those types of setups?
I mean, that's the goal, right? The goal is to build the pattern libraries that drive the experience, so that if a change needs to be made, that change is made in the in the library, and then it propagates out through the entire experience. There's all kinds of examples of lifestyle. If you just Google lifestyle guides, there's sites that are pattern library after pattern library, and they give you a good sense of that.
Right. And Ron highlights it's slightly different than the one-man team problem. It's more about being outnumbered. And in very large organizations, the ratio might be 1 to 1,000. That is, one designer, 1,000 engineers. Do you have any insight in that? Not being solo, but being outnumbered. And the difference is, I think you might have a team of dozens of UX designers, but there's still thousands of engineers, so you're outnumbered, right?
Yeah. Look, I would look to the work that the team, Dave Cronin's, formerly Greg Petrov's, now Dave Cronin's team at GE, has done, because they were in that situation. They are in that situation. Yeah. GE, they built that software center of excellence in San Ramon, California, and they were collecting designers out there. And still, I think at its peak, I don't even know if it's there yet, but at its peak, they were going to get 300 designers, and still looking at 10,000 engineers that they're supporting. And it's a case study in the first book and in the second edition, and in Lean UX, in the second edition of Lean UX as well, about how they built this. It wasn't just a style guide or a pattern library or a design system. It was a community. Mm-hmm. It was a community of product managers, engineers, and designers that revolved around forgive me for using this phrase, but it was necessary in this case, best practices for digital design. And by creating both the assets and the community to support a conversation around these assets, they were empowering the 9,700 designers that they didn't have man-to-man coverage on, 9,700 engineers they didn't have man-to-man coverage on, to do good work and to ask them questions and to get involved in that. And it's through that conversation that they've been able, through that system really, that they've been able to create a massive software business that delivers highly usable, well-designed products from, again, it's essentially, it's 300 designers to at least 10,000 engineers. So that's a really good case study there. The Industrial Internet Design System is what it's called at GE.
Yeah, no, that's great. And tools play a role there as well too. I know here at Mural, we're working with IBM, trying to scale design thinking across a 400,000 person organization, and that's an interesting challenge as well too. So, what tools do you use for Lean UX in particular, and how might they help you scale?
It's a great question. I'm fairly tool agnostic. The teams that I work with use whatever works best for them. I mean, I can tell you that generally, I recognize that Mural is awesome, but I like tools like Mural. I like shared white spaces. I'm in my home office. Spend a lot of time here. I work with a lot of teams all over the world. Shared whiteboards, shared digital spaces work really well. We use Google Docs for a lot of collaboration. We use Trello for any kind of, not only initiative management, but we've used it to help build MVPs in the past. I like, as far as design tools go, I like Sketch. I like Pixelmator for basic photo editing and asset creation. A lot of the teams that I'm working with are using InVision. Lots and lots of interesting stuff happening with InVision over there. Procreate, I see that as popping up a lot more these days. But really, from a tools perspective, it's whatever can make you the most productive, the fastest. I don't have a particular preference for a particular suite. If you're good at Axure and you can, I've worked with teams who can spin up an Axure prototype in 30 minutes, right? Terrific. Yeah. Use Axure. Like I don't particularly care. Right. If it gets you the feedback, the learning that you need, that's what I care about.
Right. Great. And, within that too is the notion of working remotely. If you are at, a ratio of 1 to 1,000, your company is going to have remote and distributed teams. And I know that's a topic you've talked about several times with Jared Spool. You had a webinar there as well too. Maybe just briefly before I get to the last question, remote lean UX is kind of a munging of topics. I realize that, but what are some thoughts that come to mind when I throw that out at you?
Yeah. So again, here's the secret sauce here, and I stole this directly from Jason Fried, who from Basecamp, and they wrote Rework and Remote and all kinds of stuff. If you have distributed teams and you work in a distributed fashion, you have to optimize for remote work. Yeah. Right. That's the biggest pain point I see in organizations. And I work in big companies, so everybody's distributed. The biggest pain point I see is that they optimize for the meeting room. And sometimes there's a person or two people in that room and 4 people or 10 people in other places. You have to optimize for remote. And that means connectivity. It means tools that everybody can access outside and inside the firewall. It means, it has to work, right? I can't tell you. I mean, I'd love to quantify how much of 2016 I lost to, can you see my screen?
Okay.
Hear me now, right? I can't hear you. We got to go to another room, right? We're getting kicked out. like all this stuff, right? You have to optimize for that remote collaboration so that you can join a meeting from anywhere, so that there's always a dial-in, that there's always a video conference, that everyone has access to it. Screen sharing is simple. Document sharing is simple, right? So all the tools that make life easy for us, consultants and freelancers like Dropbox and Google Docs, as long as you've got those or some equivalent that optimizes for that remote collaboration, everything can work.
Yeah.
It's a bit more challenging, but you've got to optimize for remote. That's got to be the focus.
Right. And, from our standpoint, just to throw a little bit of mural thinking in there, it's about thinking digital first is what we say. Because as soon as you throw up a sticky note on a flip chart in a meeting room, you've locked out everybody else who's not in that meeting room. So
right.
You need to be thinking, how do we do everything that we're going to do, whether it's through Envision or Google Docs or Mural? How do we do that digital so that it's portable and shareable and all those good things that go along with good remote work hygiene?
Yeah.
Last question here. What is the future of lean and agile? And I took the UX off of lean there on purpose there. Like, we're in this big kind of groundswell of lean and agile thinking. People are adopting it a lot. So where is this going in your opinion?
So here's what I hope happens. Inevitably, as we've seen decade after decade after decade, the shine wears off the flavor of the month, right? So there will be something that comes after agile, and there will be something that comes after lean, and and lean startup and that type of thing. My hope is that whatever comes after continues to leverage the principles that make these ideas so attractive in the first place. So the values of continuous learning and continuous improvement, of humility, of experimentation, of customer centricity, and making our customers successful and measuring success through that customer success, ultimately being the baseline, the baseline value for all of this. And I think good processes, or whatever people call it in the future, will follow. And I think that's the key. And it's difficult. It's not how companies are run, and it's not currently what's being taught in business schools. And so it's but if we can build companies that have those cultural values, that's where I hope this can, and then we'll always be agile, lowercase a, right? And we'll always be reducing waste, and we'll always be customer centric. And that's what I hope we move to, and that we maintain the values.
That's a great answer and a great vision. So the final question, just to close that off, is what's next for Jeff Gothelf? You got 2 books out now, or the second one should be in a UPS truck on its way to your house. What's next?
So I'm spending this year speaking at a few conferences, teaching a few public workshops around the U.S. and probably a couple in Europe as well. I'm working with a couple of larger clients, both with their product teams and their executives, to help build these cultures of product discovery and the leaderships that support them. I'm always interested in finding new clients to work with. And so if you're interested in having me work with your teams, please don't hesitate to reach out. And really the focus for me is to continue having this conversation and trying these ideas. Look, I'll be perfectly honest with you. All of these ideas come from experimentation and learning. Things that I've tried as a practitioner, in-house, as a consultant, with clients, with customers. And the things that have worked, we've written about. The things that haven't worked, we've written about. And that's where the learning comes from, and that's where this thing continues to get better. So I'm eager to hear what you folks have to say about this stuff as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, let's keep the conversation going. We got a lot of questions. I know I didn't get to all of them. We're at the end of our time here. So Jeff, thanks so much again for joining us. I hope this was useful and fun for you, at least. The books are Lean UX and Sense and Respond. Should be hitting the bookshelves pretty soon. What was that, February 7th on Sense and Respond? February 7th.
And I'll say one more thing really quick. If you didn't get your question answered and you'd like to get it answered, you can email me. Please just email me your question. I'd be happy to respond. Might take me a couple days to get to it. But my email address is jeff@gothelf.co. And so if you didn't get your question answered and you really want me to reply, just email me. I'd be happy to hear from you, and we can chat.
All right, fantastic. We're going to end it there. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone, for joining. With that, we'll end the session today. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.